Your alumni love helping students and fellow graduates, but they simply don't have time to attend every event, answer every call, or learn yet another online platform. With Protopia, making an impact is easier than it's ever been before. Ever. There's no new app to sign up for or use in our already busy lives. Students, alumni, or even staff can quickly ask for advice or networking via a simple form, email, or text. Protopia's artificial intelligence searches the institution's existing alumni data to find the best experts that are the most likely to assist based on experience, availability, location, and other factors. Each matched alum receives a direct, blind email to ask them to help, giving alumni full control over if and how they want to respond, whether that's by email, call, or a virtual meeting. And if it's not a good time, Protopia's AI simply reaches out to the next alum until the question has been answered. The student receives advice right into her email inbox and is coached to engage the alum to grow her professional network. Finally, our rich dashboard lets staff follow along, view detailed engagement analytics, and access updated alumni data. Protopia. Simple for them, simple for you.
Hello and welcome to Alumless. Thank you for listening to the show for March 13th, 2026. This is the Exploring the 2026 National Alumni Survey edition. I'm Ryan Catherwood, and I am joined by CMAC founder and CEO Chris Marshall. What's going on, man? Good to see you.
Good to see you, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy Friday to you. We are recording a week in advance due to some scheduling, but it is Friday for us.
It is, yeah.
On the show, we talk about alumni and constituent engagement strategies and education advancement. As I mentioned, we're pre-recorded today, but do say hello in the comments section of LinkedIn or YouTube because we tune in and respond to those comments during the stream the best we can. And of course, if you're listening to it by podcast, we appreciate you adding us to your feed. And we are grateful for the teams at Protopia, Alumni Q, Givesy, and our newest presenting sponsor is Richmond Associates. Just started off with us here halfway through season 4, but we are thrilled to have them. Chris, we are going to have a great show today. I know a lot of listeners tuned in to the last time we had Howard Heevner on the show to talk about the National Alumni Survey. About this time last year, I believe it was. But let's talk a little bit about the survey itself, the partnership between CMAC, Washburn McGoldrick, and then, of course, our special guest today, Howard Heevner, who is co-founder of the NAS.
Yeah. Well, huge shout out to Howard to start with. I mean, this has been his baby and brainchild for several years now. We've taken it over this past year. A couple of shout outs, Sarah Kleberger, Howard's partner in crime in this. Of course, our sponsors have been great. This has been allowed our institutions to participate at no cost and generating a really great product because we have sponsors, and that's been wonderful. Howard will mention all of those. But another shout out is to Steve Devlin and Dan Lohman from Washburn McGoldrick, who did all the behind the scenes calculating and number crunching that goes on to make this all work. What I'm most excited about is that we're finally getting, we've wrung our hands around this issue of annual giving numbers dropping and dollars going up, percentages going down, what's going on and why, and especially precipitously in our younger classes. This gets at helps us answer the question, why? What is it that's happening and how can we fix it? Instead of sitting around doing what we've always done, expecting a different result, which is, we know, is the definition of insanity. So we actually have some data that can tell us what to do right now, or what to do differently, I should say. And let's bring on the man who knows this better than anybody. Get Howard out here and talk about it.
That sounds great. Let's do exactly that. Bringing out to the show is our friend and colleague, Howard Heevner. Howard is by day the executive director of giving programs at Cal Berkeley. He is vice president and consultant at CMAC, and he is the co-founder of the National Alumni Survey, a man who wears many hats. Howard, it is good to see you.
It's good to see you all as well. Thank you for having me. And I just, I'm fickle, so I have to try a different hat every day. So that's why there's always got to be something new to do.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I know that everyone's excited to learn from you today, Howard. But let's start maybe from the top here. What problem was the National Alumni Survey really trying to solve?
The genesis out of this actually started with some work that was happening at Ruffalo Noel Levitz with Sarah Kleberger through the Schuler Foundation, looking at millennial patterns and in relation to philanthropy a number of years ago. And then I partnered with RNL at the time, as well as Sarah, to really start to kind of, how do we answer this question in a bigger way? How do we spend a lot of time sitting in rooms looking at each other and saying, I don't know, what are you doing that works? And it just kind of started to occur of like, maybe we should stop asking each other and start asking the people we're trying to actually influence. And I think that kind of is a kickoff point of like, how do we have greater intelligence about the trends versus just, reading tea leaves and pretending that we're in their brains. Let's actually ask the question of them.
In our discussions about the NIS, you've said that trust is the new currency. Tell us a little bit about what that means in the context of alumni engagement.
I mean, I think that it actually highlights the value of alumni engagement more than ever. When we start to look into the data of what's in the actual survey itself and what's happening societally, we're seeing a degradation of trust with institutions, right? And that's also true for alma maters, is that we used to have an assumed level of loyalty. And now we're in a space where we have to actually re-earn that trust every day. And for many years, we've functioned in this way of just acting as if they automatically trust us because we gave them a degree. There's some real generational divides in that, but trust as a new currency really kind of speaks to how do we frame this work in a way that builds trust in the process of connectivity. How do we build trust in a way that says that we're not just your alma mater, but we're also a partner. And that's where alumni engagement, I think, plays a key role in showing that what is our value to them as an individual on top of their value to us.
I think it's incredibly important, and it often strikes me, some of the language that we use has always struck me as challenging, like the way we use the phrase give back sometimes. I've kind of struggled with that one. I think we'll talk more about that as we move forward.
Like pay it forward, do because someone else did, give to the alma mater, right? All these things. Yes, absolutely. Just there's so much in the language you use that is really at the core of the challenges we face right now.
I know a lot of people who are listening are nodding their heads right now. They're sort of lined up here on what we're saying about some of these challenges. But talk about some of the trends you're seeing in the data that you've been getting back. And I guess the next thought here is, if we ignore these trends, what do you think happens over the next 10 years?
What happens over the next 10 years is what's been happening over the last 20, which we just continue to see the degradation in our donor populations. We continue to see the offloading of donors in our sweet spot. We see more kind of, I call them loyalty gifts, go away gifts, instead of truly transformational gifts from the population who theoretically cares the most about us. So in the trends, what I'm seeing is just really this kind of overarching is this kind of bifurcation of the population. And we use the age of 45 as the dividing point because that's where the millennial population is typically kind of starts, right? And what kind of led to that kind of thought process is really, if you look at the mayoral election in New York City last year, and if you view Cuomo as the loyalty candidate, the traditional Democratic Party candidate, and you've used Mandani as the values-based candidate, trust-earning candidate, when you look at that through the lens of demographics, those over the age of 45 broke very hard for Cuomo, and those under the age of 45 broke very hard for Mamdani. And so we're seeing that same type of dynamic really play out throughout all this data. And we to the point where when you get the report, you'll actually see we've actually used that age of 45 as a demarcation of like behavior changes, because it is really dramatically different between the two ages, to the sets of populations.
The other thing that I noticed about, I've heard you say that 45-year-old mark, and I was talking about it recently, and I realized that 45 years old, if you're a typical undergrad, you probably graduated, or right around 2003 is that graduation demarcation year, which is also the year I point to is when social media, Facebook became, the way people connected to each other. So there's got to be a connection. This isn't in our script, so I'm sorry to go off on your.
Sorry, that's me. I'm class of 03, and myself, I'm 45, and you're right, Chris. It's amazing to think about. My college experience was void of social media, right? But it emerged immediately after, to the point of my wife, who is 3 years younger, right, was up on Facebook, on MySpace, on like the original social media platforms, and had a different experience during college as well.
You know what
Yep.
predated that? It was called Friendster, and it
Right.
was awful. It was terrible. So here's the thing: is the speed of information has sped up so fast, and the accessibility to information, right? Like, and you have societally like these things happening, right? You have 2008 market crash, and subsequently, like some of the social moves came out of that. You have COVID, obviously. You have all these things happening that are shifting people's perspective on loyalty and reframing. Now, I'm gonna posit a theory that I have no actual data behind, but I actually think free agency in baseball changed the entire social structure of the way we view loyalty. I think that once free agency happened, that society we started to move away from the idea of the company man is what it was called, right? Where you would work the same place for 45 years and you began to see these shifts. And I think it's just played out through the rest of this. Now, no data
Wow.
backing it. It's just my personal theory to blame baseball for all this. But
Well timed as we're in spring training here. I've been
Right.
kind of looking
So here.
forward to baseball.
Howard, is there a data point that was the most surprising, a single data point that you went and saw, whoa, that raised the
Yeah.
eyebrow the most?
And that data point was a point where I decided this was something that I needed to do more with. It was the first year we did the project. We looked at the reported behaviors of non-donors, so people who are not giving to their alma mater, and we asked them if they were giving elsewhere, and 60% said that they were giving somewhere else. And that is a that radically changes the perspective we've held in higher education about the way we approach non-donors. Traditionally, we would sit in these rooms and we would talk to each other. We need to educate them. They don't know how to give. The problem isn't us. The problem is that they don't know how to do this. It's so funny being educational institutions assuming ignorance on our population that we have theoretically educated. But beside the point, I did it. I was part of this, right? And so when I saw that moment and saw that 60%, it completely changed the way I think about the work we do, and that we as higher ed have to move closer to where they are instead of continually demanding them come closer to us. And so that one data point has held through all 3 years of this now, over 155,000 alumni surveys, consistently been true. And it really changes the way you think about the work when you start to take that into account. They're not choosing us. It's not that they don't know, they don't choose us. And so we have to do something different in order to be the place they want to focus their support.
Was there a data that confirmed something that you suspected but wasn't able to prove?
It's the values-based conversation. For me, it comes out of when I was working at UC Santa Cruz on our first giving day. We started to put we had all the traditional, like we were doing what everyone was doing at the time, right? It was just putting like the annual funds on the platform. And then we started some student groups approached us and said, hey, we want to put things up too. And we're like, okay, cool. And then all of a sudden, the very specific student group stuff started to blow up. And all of a sudden we were seeing like, well, this is where the energy is being met, is in all these very kind of micro funds, these places that were people able to illustrate their see their values reflected to them and give. And so for me, I had this kind of working theory, like, oh, I think there's some things really happening here. And in this data, to begin to see it play out, when we ask about greatest need every year, and to see the under 45 crowd be super low and the over 45 crowd be double to almost 3x of what they believe about going to give to that to me is really was really validating. I only do things to really validate my perspective. I mean, it's just mainly where I live. So,
and if it doesn't, the data's not right.
Then wrong. Clearly somebody did something wrong, and it wasn't me. I promise you.
Hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break, have a word from our sponsor, and we will be right back. All right, we are back with Howard Heevner. We've been talking about the 2026 findings from the National Alumni Survey. Howard, talk a little bit about how different Gen Z, millennial behaviors, some of the things that they're signaling through the survey, maybe from boomers. We've talked about that 45 years of age kind of demarcation line, but there's probably some other demarcation lines showing up in the behaviors kind of based on age.
I'm gonna keep grouping them because it makes life easier. So there are three things that came out of this that are generationally different that are super fascinating to me. And when you think about them, you're like, well, yeah, but it's cool to have the data. One is those under the age of 45 don't think about giving annually. They think about giving as needed. Every institution probably has a shop on their campus. I am in a shop like this that still has annual in the title. That's not how they think. Two, they prefer or are giving more frequently to individuals through things like GoFundMe than they want to give to institutions. So that is a very informative kind of data point. Three, I'm going to give you four. I got a bonus one. Three, they are also really, really comfortable with things like e-wallet and would prefer to give through e-wallet than the previous generations. And the bonus one is the point I made before about this really different perspective on what they want to give to. They are minimally interested in giving to what the institution would call the area of greatest need versus older alums who are on board. And so those are like some of the kind of, just like in a nutshell, those are like the really quick hits of like things that are very different between the rising generations who are now in their mid 40s and the generations that I am part of as an Xer. And so it's super informative.
One of the most compelling questions that I saw in the survey was this, the question was, how well does your alma mater know you? I'm going to come back to my question to you and just share this personal story is that I worked at my alma mater. I went to Lehigh 5 years, worked there for 19 years afterwards, 24 years, and I've been out almost 20. I've left working at Lehigh 20 years ago. And I would say that my alma mater that I've spent 2.5 decades at does not know me. And they talk to me and they send me stuff in the mail and emails like they don't have any clue who I am. And it's just... I'm an N of one in that example, but it's so frustrating that you would think they'd get it right with someone. And I'm not that huge a donor, but I am a donor. Yep. Why does that matter so much? The notion of how well the alma mater knows you.
I mean, I think you are a case in point, Chris Marshall, because and so I'd also say this too, like think about your interactions every day now with any number of vendors or marketing kind of areas in your life. And you're getting American Express advertisements that are specific to your spending patterns. You are getting suggestions on Amazon that you might like this. You go to shop, the same thing. Their culture is built around this idea of actually knowing you. And the one place that has the deepest one of 3 or 4 lifelong relationships that you have, right? Maybe 2. Maybe there's 2 lifelong relationships outside of family. And we can't begin to guess at what you care about. Like it is like it's at the crux of it, right? It's like the crux. And also too, in defense of our industry, because I'm often critical of it, but I try to own my own parts of those things. But in defense of our industry, the technology stack inside institutions have not been capable of handling it. But there are so many of those opportunities rising right now in the market to help us do that I think that in the next 5 years, we have to get it right or we're going to be further into this problem.
I kind of sit right on that line in terms of giving to the area of greatest need, like because I understand that that's important for alma mater. I give to that, and I guess to your point, like I give every month, right? And it's just like the direct, debit right out of the bank account, and I love that, right? I don't have to think about making a gift. I see it every time the transaction comes through on a monthly basis, and so it's sort of like how I prefer to give, but not to Chris, your point, never once has the University of Richmond, my alma mater, who I love, has ever said, hey, we see that you were part of the Rhetoric and Communication Studies department. We see that you were a part of Greek life. We see that, X, Y, or Z. You should make a gift to this relevant fund, right? And that's probably, Howard, not happening for the most part across the whole country. Like that's where we're headed, right? I mean,
well, it's where we need to be heading. And I would say it's even beyond like what you did as a student, because you're not who you were at 18 years old or 19 years old. And you in what you click, and you in what work you do, and particularly you as visible you are in LinkedIn, like we have some ideas of what you care about, and how are we not ingesting that data and reusing and bringing it back out to say, hey, Ryan, are you interested in this entrepreneur's fund? Right? Or in this kind of independent business kind of practice or whatever it is, right? That may speak to, or let's say that you click every article that comes to you about something to do with dogs or cats or whatever, right? So why wouldn't we be coming back to you and being like, yes, you have a degree from this area, but we understand you care about animals and maybe be interested in the vet med school. right? Like
Yeah.
how like that's the transition we have to make, is stop thinking in territorial terms of like you fit into the liberal arts bucket or you fall into the engineering bucket, but you fit into the bucket of our community, and we care about the fact that you like that you care about these things. I'd also share that I don't make unrestricted gifts to almost any institution, because I've been on the other side of this for a very long time. And so I am always giving, I always give more specifically. So
Yeah.
just always have.
It's super fascinating, this sort of inflection point that we're in. I guess a few shows back we had Josh Harriman on from Ohio State talking about the attention economy, and like I feel like this is all connected to that, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
what is going to capture and keep our attention are the things that create an emotional response, right, in us, and remind us to do a thing or remind us of a thing, that of a sense of belonging. And next question I would imagine is kind of connected to that, which is, why are general appeals losing their effectiveness?
Alumless podcast. You could go for a long time, but to kind of keep it brief, one is our message is stale. We're recycling loyalty-based messages over and over again, instead of thinking about minimally how are you using the institution as a conduit to impact and not a gift to the institution. Particularly when you think about that data point about people wanting to give individuals an individual impact instead of institutions, we continue to market as if they want to give to an institution into the pit of
The entity.
dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of the messaging, you look at any number of annual giving, like fundraising letters, it's almost always about the impact to the organization instead of the impact to the students, the community, and the world. And so that would be like one quick thing, that re-looking at all of our language and thinking about how we do that. The other thing I would say is that, again, that demarcation of generation demarcation is those who are in the millennial or in Gen Z are less responsive to direct mail and email than they were in the past, and then Gen X. So I've looked at the data at Berkeley, and who are millennials are 1/3 as responsive to direct mail as Gen X, and it's the same audience definition, same donor population definitions. It's just that train's left the station, and so we need to kind of catch up to where it's at.
As a follow-up to that, Howard, just as a strategy or as a tactic, I think if folks are listening to us and looking to take something away, would you, as a practitioner, take that 45-year-old demarcation line and continue to do what we've always done for people who are older than that, and then flip the script for everybody younger? Is that a simple thing that maybe folks could do?
It's basically how I'm kind of doing my program in a lot of ways, is we're continuing to do our traditional program for those of a certain age, or those who are responsive. We're trying to model those under the age of 45 who are still responsive to those traditional direct marketing tactics. And then we are bringing in as much kind of crowdfunding, giving day kind of activity as we can to acquire and reacquire those donors who don't speak, those pieces don't speak to. So it's less of a hard line, because it's all individual and those lines are soft, right? But it's certainly you have to, in a modern program, to be successful, it feels like you have to run two programs at once. You have to run the traditional program for those who are going to reply to it, and then you need to be thinking about a new space where you are trying to break into more and more kind of markets, and whether that be with very specific projects. We've got kind of three categories. We have crowdfunding, we have giving day and giving days, and then we have rapid response projects. So for example, last fall at Berkeley, when the SNAP money was delayed, we put together a basic needs center project, and very quickly, and in the month of November, produced 1,500 donors to it. And that's a rapid response project. We had to act quickly and kind of be nimble with it. So you've got to get out of just like this simple kind of like, I send 6 mailings a year. The other thing I would say is, with this space, this digital space is, we've traditionally thought about like another marketing channel, like, oh, we're going to do more marketing, and it's not what it is. You need to, and this is another kind of intersect of kind of the alumni world, success in digital giving spaces is really about, you got to think about it more like community organizing. How are you bringing people together to act as ambassadors or as facilitators to the giving process? So
you touched on already the next question, which was the thinking differently about the area of greatest need. But this notion of like this black hole fund is what I would refer to it as. And you all the way back to the beginning of this discussion, trust. right? There's not the trust in the institution using that for the purposes that, that many, the younger you get, the more likely it is they're not going to trust the institution. We have a client who we just learned that they still go by unrestricted annual giving is the only donors they count in their giving percentage. And if someone gives to a specific sport or the theater or fill in the blank, every year for 100, however many years, they don't count unless you give to unrestricted annual giving. That's just like shooting ourselves in the foot, I think.
They're going to be very lonely. Well, so let's start with that, right? And talk about and kind of put it through the framing of trust. First of all, for years, we have taken a fund that requires the most trust in the institution. And we've asked the populations who have exhibited the least amount of trust to make their first gift there. And then we acted like there was something wrong with them when they didn't do that.
We didn't teach them right, Howard. We didn't teach them right.
Clearly, I'm not doing my job. The hubris of that, right, just always kind of drives me crazy. I think with, one of the questions I get asked or I've been asked to address at different times is like, is unrestricted dead? And it's like, well, it's institutionally necessary. It's never going to be dead. But what I would say is we have to be real about where those dollars are coming from. At every institution you're working with, if you sit down and if you do the analysis of where do the majority of your dollars come from for these unrestricted funds, it's going to be $1,000 plus. And so why are we acting like those donors making their first 6 gifts are driving those dollars? So if there's a world that exists where we can do this part up front, where we're doing all the mechanisms of crowdfunding, et cetera, and building a trusting relationship with those donors that you're actually using the money you say it will, to the point where when they break that $1,000 point, you're able to have a conversation with them about making that gift, right? That unrestricted gift. So I think it's critical for us to just have a really, really, really honest conversation.
Yep. Well, I mean, it sounds like there is a good amount of work to do here, making some clear revisions on what we have described as annual giving strategies. And I think, part of this process is taking a look at the traditional annual giving to major gift model as well, right? As this pipeline development process. Talk a little bit about some of your findings there, and the data is signaling maybe broken in that respect.
I mean, this is going to be a little bit less of the data, a little bit more of just my years of experience and kind of seeing things. And it's a little bit around the language though, too. This idea of a pipeline from interaction to major gift, et cetera, right? Like that pathway that we have kind of called pipeline, I've always struggled with it, and more so now than ever. I think we're thinking in too technical of terms about the human capacity of our populations, and we need to start thinking more about individual trajectories. What is the trajectory of an individual? Is it accelerating? Is it decelerating? Is it stalled? How are we creating moments in time where we're kind of strategically moving them in that pathway, right? And I think for so long, what we just thought about is like, we had this big pool, we need to make it to a small pool, and the small pool is going to be the right people. And we're going to do some things along the way, right? We're going to do the science along the way and do the work along the way to kind of find those people. But we would just acquire as many donors as possible and kind of hope that the right people are in that population. And I think there has to be greater intentionality, and I think there has to be greater kind of leveraging of all the parts of a relationship versus strictly like you build relationships over here in the masses, and then we put them into annual giving, and it's just all very extractive and very like checking the box. And then once they make enough gifts and they break a certain level, they get handed to a gift officer and they go back to a very relational kind of behavior. And I think we've got to kind of stop the technical part of that middle part and start to recognize how does this all work together to create a more solid pathway for people to move forward. So it's a little bit of a reframe of the work. And what it actually really does in some ways is just tie together what already happens at the major gift end and what already happens at the alumni end with the middle, which had, because of budgets, because of our approach to it, is very technical and very, like I said many times in my career, you got to break some eggs to make a cake. And like I ran student phone programs, and that was, I would call it antagonistic communication, because we're trying to disrupt somebody's day to have them do something they wouldn't normally do. And we have to change our perspective on what is relational in that process. So
if you have people who are accelerating in their giving, people who are sort of stagnant, meaning they've stayed the same for years, or those who have decelerated.
Right.
Like from a tactical standpoint, do you think it's best to sort of focus specifically on those who have accelerated and try to specifically think about the journeys, the re-engagement for that population, or would you think about it differently?
Well, in theory, those people that are accelerating are already doing what we want them to do. as they are engaging more highly and giving more frequently than their peers, right? So the group I'm probably most interested in initially are those who are stalled. For example, at Berkeley right now, there's a group I'm tracking on that drives me crazy, and we're working on figuring out a strategy for it. Is they've been giving between $500 and $2,500 a year for the last 5 years, and they have been in that range. They've not moved up and they've not moved down. They are just stalled. On my team, we're talking about what type of interventions we create in order to move those people along, right? People are accelerating or decelerating has a story behind why they're doing it, and probably living a good life, probably living the life we want them to live in some ways, particularly those people are accelerating, right? Those people are stalled. They're still giving, they're still doing something, but there's something missing that's going to move them to that next place. That's the audience of opportunity. And it depends on the population, right? I have a massive population to work with. So I can't chase every decelerating person, but I can certainly track down these stalled people and try to figure out what's going on with them.
Look, an educated guess here, Howard. You've looked under the hood at many places, so you know. But as you're describing this, I'm thinking to myself, I bet you there's the majority of places don't know what you were just talking about. Who falls into the stagnant, accelerate, decelerate?
No.
They're just doing what they've always done. They're just pumping out their mailing system, their sequence of mailing letters out and emails out on a regular basis, and not even looking at the data.
Well, and what they're doing though is they're looking at their silo, right? They're looking at their portion. Like alumni's got their portion, and annual giving's got its portion, and major gifts has got its portion, and it's not necessarily like looking at the intersection of those things. And so the reality is good annual giving now doesn't look like pumping out mailings, right? It looks like this integrated strategy with a lot of alumni stuff involved, a lot of volunteerism. We launched a Giving Day Ambassador program 3 years ago at Berkeley, and next week we expect to have between 1,000 and 1,200 ambassadors for our Giving Day, and 3 years ago it was like 300. And right, like that's not a traditional like old school annual giving, like churn it through, right? I would say that program, and the other thing I would say on that too is like we haven't figured out how to measure this yet, right? Like, how do you measure acceleration? What are the factors? And so that's a question that I honestly spend more time with than, I spend a lot of time with it just in my own program, trying to figure out exactly how we're going to put our arms around how do we know that this is true. And so
we may have covered it. I want to make sure I asked the question so we can get it in here. How should schools be thinking about qualification differently in 2026?
I think they need to be, one is they need to think about qualification in the way that kind of fits their institutional needs, right? So and the reason why I say that, and it's a non-answer, but the reason why I say that is because for my institution, we have a lot of potential capacity. And so we need to front load identification. We need to go through and find everyone, all the low-hanging fruit. We got to do that work. But if you're at a school like where I was at before, I was at UC Santa Cruz, where it's like, it's tougher, right? You need to be thinking about it in terms of what are those interventions that create moments of cultivation? How are we cultivating these populations intentionally? It's a little bit more of like, it depends on your situation. And I think that, we just went to a conference last week with one of my staff and I, and we were talking about after the fact, and her role of 3 years ago, her role is very unique there. She's a focus on the pipeline. That's her title, is pipeline development. And she said when she went to this thing 3 years ago, she couldn't really find anyone to talk to, because everybody else was like still kind of thinking about the like, pull the levers kind of stuff. And she said this time it was like the most of the conversations involved that kind of idea of how we're moving people along. And so I think that the way we think about cultivation really has to be kind of framed in this idea of what do we need to do for our population? What are the interventions we can create? What are the tools we have available to us? And so it's not a one size fit all, but it is absolutely more of a thought process than just a simply like, yes, check this box, because traditional annual giving was a little bit more just check the box in some ways.
Right. And part of the answer to this question, I think about this all the time. I wrote this screed on LinkedIn the other day talking about how if I was starting from scratch, I would not build clubs or chapters. And the reason that I have this philosophy is because if we're going to get people who are stalled out in their giving, we need to give them something meaningful to do that's lightweight and effective and will help a student and move forward. And there is no opportunity to scale volunteerism associated with managing groups or putting on events, right? At the vast majority of schools, there are schools that have a lot more resources, right? But like the notion of the reason that we should flip the script around events and scaling of volunteerism is so that we have effective partnership with those who are building pipeline, right? To make sure that there's avenues for those people for that next play, right, in their journey.
So for us, and we're thinking about philanthropic volunteer specifically, we've kind of put it into the three realms of what's a micro volunteer opportunity, what's a meso, and then what is a macro, right? And so like micro being a day or two, meso being 2 to 3 months, and macro being kind of board service. And how do we use that as a scaffolding to move people through that level of engagement based on what their needs are? And so our Giving Day ambassadors and micro example, we have some other ideas about how to create these meso kind of experiences, which are 2 or 3 months of engagement in a philanthropic fundraising process. And then macro, we have plenty of board service for people to land in. So it's your point, right? It's having a little bit more of a like, what is the scaffolding to get to that next place? Instead of our traditional way, which is like, we're gonna do some things over here, we're gonna do some things over here, and we're gonna, at some point, it's all gonna come together into a stew, and we're gonna extract out what we need. And it's like, let's be a little more intentional with the resources.
All right, let's take another quick break, and we will be right back with Howard Heevner.
Meet Alumni Q, the only all-in-one platform built exclusively for higher education. From everyday events and email outreach to online giving, directories, membership management, and seamless integrations, Alumni Q helps institutions connect, engage, and inspire. Handling major reunions or homecomings? Alumni Q's signature events service has you covered with rules-based registration, name tag printing, real-time reporting, and giving integration. Visit alumniq.com to request a demo and start making meaningful connections today.
All right, Howard. So at the top of the show, we were talking about what's going to happen in 10 years, right? If we don't get our act together and we do something different. And Chris, you were saying a lot of what's going to happen is what's already been already happening, which is that donor counts are going to continue to decline. Did the NAS for this year, Howard, kind of help explain why this is happening?
I mean, it's a lot of things we've been talking about, right? I mean, if you think about it, it is the mismatch of offer with people's expectations. It's the lack of understanding of how they're giving. You know, I think what we saw, if you go back to almost to 2000, really is when we first started seeing some of this. I remember being in my early part of my professional career, and we were starting to do these first-time donor packets because first-time donor percentages had just started to drop. They were in the 40-some% range, and now today a good program's doing mid-20s, maybe private schools get into 30%. And people were freaking out. And so we just started doing like crazy stuff. Like you made a gift of $25 and you'd get like a CD of the fight song. But, you know, like we started to do these really elaborate things that were disproportionate to the gifts. And so I think it only made it all worse. And, you know, but I think it's in the generational change. I think it's in this shift from generations, because if you really think about when the really goods amplify is as millennials become adults, like they just didn't step into the giving pattern stream like other generations did before them. Like they just didn't have that expectation or that kind of loyalty kind of construct that generations before have had.
Is this temporary dip in thinking, or are we going to see this sort of long term or get worse?
This is structural. This is a fundamental shift in the way our alumni are relating to us. And we have two choices. Either we continue to do what we've always done and we end up being completely non-consequential in their lives, or we make a change. I liken it in some ways to like there's an old Simpsons episode where Bart and Lisa get in a fight, and Bart says, I'm going to start walking towards you and I'm just going to swing my arms. If I happen to hit you, it's on you. And Lisa says, well, fine, I'm going to start kicking my legs. If I happen to hit you, then it's on you. And that's kind of like where we're at, where we're just like kind of flailing about, not actually being super targeted about how we're reaching out to people. It's a great episode. But so like, right. So I think that we're in this kind of structural shift, and if we don't address it, we're going to be irrelevant to them.
Do you think these are unique to college, university, higher ed fundraising, or are all nonprofits dealing with these same kinds of issues? Or my experience has been is that other nonprofits, smaller ones, are more nimble and have already made the adaptation and made the changes that need to make. They talk to me like they know me.
Well, I mean, so let's first say it's easier for them to talk to you about they know you because they're typically one issue topics, right? So like so they're speaking, if you're giving to the food bank, they're going to talk to you about food security because they think they're pretty sure you care about food security. Yep. And so it's a little easier to reflect it back to you, right? We have a complexity that's a little different. I think there has definitely been some challenges in the nonprofit world, but I think something has to do with the cyclical nature of crisis. When you look at the big numbers, right? Like, because like in any time where there's a crisis moment, there is this mass influx of resources and then it drops. And so it looks like it's declining, right? So COVID created this huge spike in giving. that then started to started to kind of like decline off over time. So it's a little harder to get up to me to get like a kind of my arms around that idea. But I think that they're dealing, and they have this kind of natural advantage, right? Of like, they're specific, so they're asking for specific things, which feels reflective values wise of who the person is. So it's a little bit hard to say for sure, but I will say that what is true is the same population has the same questions, and it's just that maybe they're answering them better because of some of the narrowness of that.
Howard, you have the power to implement one fundamental change in our industry. Everyone has to do what you say. What are you going to tell them to do?
First of all, that's exciting. It's just created my fantasy world. I would say this: let's value every individual equally and pretend as if we cared for them equally, because we don't do that right now. And part of the problem we're having is that small level donors, we're not given the respect to say that they're not giving for a reason, but instead giving for some other thing that they don't understand. They're not educated, that they're ignorant of what we're talking about. So let's actually stop. Let's assume that everyone actually has the same level of understanding, and that we have to change in order to meet their needs instead of them change to meet our needs. Right. And that would probably be the single thing that would change the entire way that we relate to our constituents.
All right. So Howard, a combo question here. One uncomfortable truth institutions need to confront right now, and then one thing because of that truth, or maybe not connected to that truth, but a different truth, that advancement leaders should stop doing right now.
So the uncomfortable truth is that we're at the source of our own problems. People are not doing, these trends are not happening to us. We are creating these trends because we have refused to adapt to the changing demographics of our constituents. That is an uncomfortable truth. And it makes people uncomfortable when I say that. And because the truth of it is, right, like the demographics shifted, and we've built a philanthropy model based on, quite frankly, straight white men who had a loyalty construct. And the rising generations is more female, more diverse, more queer identifying, but we still want them to live in our structure created for people who look like me. And that's an uncomfortable truth. And it's a little hard to kind of like get your head around. That is apolitical. That is just the data. So, and then what should they stop doing immediately? I think I'd reverse that and say what they should start doing immediately is actually creating mechanisms to listen to their constituents and then actually changing based on the feedback they get from them. So for years, we have asked questions of our alums and our parents and et cetera. We've taken that information in and we have not done anything with it. It sat on a shelf and it was an interesting idea, but we didn't change what we were reflecting back to them. We just continued to do the same thing. And that advancement leaders need to start creating mechanisms for listening, and then mechanisms on how we actually adapt to what we're hearing about from that listening.
So we spent this conversation talking about a lot of the challenges, the need to evolve that is incredibly important, lots to do. What gives you hope about all this?
I'm going to answer this in two parts. But the first part is that the people who have moved towards this work with me and talking about the National Alumni Survey about the need for this, CMAC, Washburn McGoldrick, Paris Leaf is such a key, one of our presenting partners as well. It's such a key partner. We have this list of sponsors: Encora, formerly RNL, People Grove, Alma Base, Givesy, Boyd and Search, 3E Enrollment, the Phoenix Philanthropy Group. They have all invested in this thing that, quite honestly, right, was like me was saying, like, we're going to do a thing. And people were like, this seems like a good thing. And we had a little bit of track record, but the fact that people are moving towards this conversation and not away from it, that gives me some hope, because I think that vendor community is part of what moves the industry forward. And I think that the changing nature of this conversation, there are things I used to say that people would kind of give me a look at and be like, what do you mean by that? Right. And it's like, instead now people are starting to reflect back some of those same things in their own voice, in their own way. There's like they're saying my words back to me, which is also delightful, but that's not what's happening. But they're having their own realizations. And the fact is that people are starting to recognize the need for us to really think about this differently. And that's hopeful, right? And the final one is really just in the data. These alums who aren't giving to us are giving. It's almost 60% of the non-donors this year are giving or volunteering someplace else. Of those who are lapsed to us, who've not didn't give last year, but they gave at some point, I think that's in like 75 to 80% of them are giving somewhere else. So in the fact that they are philanthropic is opportunity and is hope. We just have to figure out how to show up in a way that matches what their expectations are of us.
As we sort of close things out today, tell everyone what they should know about the findings of this year's survey. If they want to participate in the future, what should they do? Like
Yeah.
where, if they just want to like consume more, get involved more, like
Yeah.
I know we have some stuff to add to the show notes here, but just talk for a few minutes about if those who want to get involved, like what should they do next?
So we'll put a link in for people to sign up to get the report sent to them directly. And also at that same forum will be an opportunity to say your institution's interested in participating in next year's National Alumni Survey. And then I think that what I just encourage everyone to do is to really, in your own environment, is to ask the question, what if? What if we did this differently? What if this isn't the right answer? What if we need a different answer? Like it's less of a movement and more of a everyone taking some personal accountability and challenging ourselves to step outside of the traditional way we've done it, or step outside of just like rinse and repeat and really look at the data and saying, what if we did this differently? What if we dumped things on its head and tried something new? So there will be the ways to get the report. You can have your own copy of the report with all of my musings, and my co-founder, Sarah Kleberger,
There we
who's
go.
really the reason why this happens, her very smart insights and my ramblings in that report that will give you some insights to what we found. If you think it's right, or you're on board, or if you want to challenge it, just reach out. Let's talk. Let's put it on LinkedIn. Let's have a conversation. That's all I want. The only thing I want out of this is for people to have a conversation about what needs to happen from here. That's the main thing. So.
Well, you can count on me to help stir the pot on this one,
I
my
know.
friend. Well, thank you, Howard, for all the work that you're doing. It's great to have you as part of the team, and I know the field is grateful for this work that you've been doing. Coming up on the 27th of March, we've got a great show coming up with Lori Hurwitz from Tulane University. Got an alumless takes between now and then as well. But thank you so much for making the Alumless podcast part of your routine, and we will see you again soon.